over an hour we've been talking, and none of it was like for the interview. And you gave me so much time, and now I've eaten up basically half of it. So welcome back, Christina.
Hi! It's so funny because I'm kind of like, in retrospect, maybe we should have recorded that because all the stuff that we were discussing about like.
When you were last here, we left at the very end of the interview with me saying, but we did not even talk about Milo the Goat. And you were like very upset of, oh my God, we didn't get to Milo. So I'm fascinated to know a bit about Milo being in the story, not just because it's such an obvious, anytime you have a small, cute animal, it becomes internet, an internet sensation, but because of the fact that from a storytelling perspective, it was very well put into the story because you had Milo the Goat being introduced with the crows, but then there's that separation and with the bullet, and then the bullet comes back into play in a very important way. And I forget, wasn't that actually in your episode?
That's my episode, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Milo, it's so funny because Milo was a character we loved in the room, and like I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna say it. Like one of the notes we got on Milo was like, what? And all of us were like, no, step off, the goat is staying. Like the goat is gold. But like he was a product of the room having a really good time and laughing because we were talking about, episode 103, which Dagan Frickelin wrote, and like I don't remember exactly how it started, but like there was like this snowball effect. And I do know that like, we're talking about emotional support animals. Dagan was like a goat. And so the joke came about that like what Jesper really needed to get through was to hug this goat. And the goat would be a fun misdirect because you think that the goat is going to be bait, but really the goat is just because like you can tell from Jesper's eyes that he needs to hug a pet. So like that all came about in Dagan's episode because she loves goats. Like I think she's told this story before about how she was like, I want to retire to a goat farm. Like she just loves goats. And so it was one of those things that like I, as somebody who worked on The Magicians before coming on to Shadow and Bone, in the room was just like, no, we are doing this goat. I will die on Goat Hill. Because I knew from working on The Magicians that this was just like, this was going to work. This was wild and unexpected and like charming and adorable. And so like we all like stood behind Dagan and it was just like, no, this is the thing. We are totally doing this. And Eric was funny because he was like cackling the entire time we were just pitching this thing. And so the goat stayed. And so then the goat just kind of like became this inside joke within the room where it was just like, like Milo protect at all costs and like take care of Milo. And so he just kind of cropped up again in the next episode, because, in the next episode, it was just like, we have to figure out what happens to Milo now that he's been with Jesper. And I can't remember who was the original person who pitched it in my episode that the bullet be on Milo, because originally Milo didn't have the bullet. But then when we were trying to figure out ways for like him to get Mal to get out of this handcuff situation, somebody was recommended, like somebody pitched like the lockpick thing, and I was just like, no, I need it to be something we've never seen before. Freaking need it to be something we've never seen before, because like I've just seen the whole like reach behind my back, pick a lock thing 1,000 times, and like so we had a few different pitches, and at one point Eric was like, what if there's a bullet inside the lock thing and he smashes it and it pops it? And I was like, that's great, but where is he going to get the goddamn bullet from? And I can't remember who said Milo, but all of us were just like, he's back! Milo's back! So like that's how Milo ended up in my episode. And then the other thing that happened was like initially Dagan was like resistant to name the goat because she was like, it's a goat. And then I was insistent in my episode. Dagan had this dog, rest in peace, Milo, who was this old cranky dog who had a little underbite, who was just like a mess, and he was just kind of like this old man who would bark at the door, and she would bring the dog to work. And so like I just decided I was naming him Milo. So like I named the goat Milo, and then Dagan was like, okay. So yeah, that's how Milo came to be. He's named after her dog.
Yeah, I love that someone made a Milo the Goat Twitter account, and I'm surprised the account isn't verified yet, to be honest, but
Same. And I might know who runs it, But I mean,
I won't spoil the mystery by even daring to ask the questions. So speaking of questions, I did want to open things up to fan questions, although I think the shout out, because the show has already come out and the main wave of loud energy surrounding it kind of died down. So I didn't get a lot of submissions, but on Twitter I did have one and I went, oh no, I can ask that. So this one says, Christina, now that it's on the second season, the process for the writers, is it easier because you've already done this before, or is it harder because of the pressure?
I love this question because I have this thing I say, which is season 2 of shows are my favorite. I think it's much easier. I think a lot of people don't realize this until they've experienced it, but working on a season 1 show is hard. It is so hard because even if you're doing an adaptation, like it's easy to think like, oh, it's cool, it's all there, you know what it is, you just have to cast it. And it's like, no, that's not it. Like the look and the tone and the execution of it, of real life human beings saying things that come from a piece of adapted material is really hard. It is really difficult to strike a balance. Like it's stressful. It's super stressful. And then on top of that, on season 1s, you're working with people that you probably have never worked with before in a brand new room. You're getting to know, each other in that process. And it's really difficult, like, do all of our voices match? What is the tone of the show? Are we following the showrunner? Are adjustments being made? Like, how do we roll with it? What is our process as a room? It's hard. Season 2 of this show was delightful. And I think that, like, we all saw it before we started the room. And I like, forgive me, Netflix, if I get in trouble for saying this, but I don't think it's a secret anymore. Like, the room, we were breaking the season before the show came out. So, like, we didn't have the pressure of knowing it was a hit. We had the stress of not being sure anybody would like it. It was more along the lines of, like, we loved it. We loved what we saw, but it's entirely possible that people will watch it and be like, I don't get it, I don't like it, whatever. So, like, it was actually really nice because we broke the season with, our hearts full of love for the show. We broke it with, like, it was almost the entire same room. We were just missing one person and we had one new addition.
Do you want to explain what you mean when you say we broke it?
Oh, when I say we broke it, I mean we broke the season. Sorry, thank you. So we broke season 2, which I can't obviously say what's in season 2 because, like, we haven't shot it yet. But we basically, when you start a writer's room, what ends up happening is that you do kind of like a loose break for the season. It's called, like, kind of blue skying. Like, you sit down and you kind of know where you want to start because based on the previous season, and then you know where you want to end. And then you kind of figure out your, like, tent poles in between and kind of figure out what each episode is about. And, like, since we're adapting source material, there's segments of source material that you definitely want to do, segments that you need to make adjustments for according to, like, what your actors bring. The other thing that's really delightful about a season 2 is that now that you have season 1 to watch, you know what your actors are doing. Because the reality of an adaptation is you have to be able to, like, make adjustments to your actor. Like, it is a collaboration. Your actor's interpretation of a character may be slightly different, or even to some extent, like, very different from what's in the source material. And so the best thing that you could do for a TV show is look at what your actor brings and write to that. So you honor the source material, but at the same time, understand that your actor is bringing, their take on things and, like, kind of marry those things. And sometimes you end up going off book and sometimes you end up staying on book. So it's, season 2s are great because at that point, like, I think a show kind of becomes its own thing. So, we broke the season, we figured out approximately what we wanted to do. And then at that point, once you have, like, a bigger arc, you start fine-tune breaking each episode and kind of, like, going from there. And it was a delightful experience. Like, the room knew each other. We had a great time. It was stressful because it was Zoom, and Zoom is, like, the most soul-sucking way to break television possible. Like, it just, staring at a screen and not being able to, like, reach out and, like, laugh and, like, interact with your coworkers is really difficult because, like, each room is its own delightful little, like, ADHD bubble. People are people are giggling, people are making inside jokes. Just, like, it's, it's different doing it on Zoom. But yeah, it was really helpful knowing everybody and knowing, like, we all had a trust for each other and a respect for each other. So it was great. I loved it. Season 2s are the best.
So obviously you have knowledge of stuff related to season 2. So when I opened things up for fan questions, I did get one that was basically asking a bunch of stuff about season 2. And I'm looking through this. I'm like, well, these are nice questions. I can't ask her any of these and have her answer them on the record. But one thing that did jump out at me where they were asking any Zoyalai crumb, which I'm assuming most of the people that are watching this are people that are familiar with the source material to varying degrees, so they know what that means. It's in reference to the character of Zoya, who we met in season 1, and then Nikolai, who's a very popular character, but he did not appear in season 1. And that got me thinking about casting, because with that being such a popular character, there's a tremendous amount of pressure to get the casting right. Now, me personally, I'm not really worried about the casting because it was so phenomenally done across the board with season 1. But I did want to ask a bit about the casting process in reference to being so accurate and not whitewashing, because you and I both know that the industry has a real problem with oftentimes whitewashing things, and when things are adapted from pre-existing source material, any type of BIPOC character, you know, whether it's in regards to colorism or straight up just changing the ethnicity, whitewashing is a huge problem. So can you talk a bit about whether it applies to Shadow and Bone or just casting in general, kind of about, you know, the way you were able to achieve accurate casting where it was important, like for Inej, for example. I feel like any other Hollywood machine would have either made her more fair complexioned or just made her a white girl, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think for us, so here was the thing that we kept to heart, because like we kept to heart, like, what does the book say the characters are in terms of like their ethnicity, you know, like Zoya in the books, Zoya is blonde hair, blue eyed. You're not going to be that if you're half Indian, dude. Like it is, you know what I mean? Like, so we were like, are we going to look for a half Indian actress who's blonde haired, blue? That's not going to happen. So we were just like, you know, let's go find an Indian actress and just cast Zoya. You know, for Jesper, it was important to us because we have a lot of mixed race people in the room that he, you know, be mixed race. Like he's black and he's white. So we just looked for casting biracial, you know, actors for Jesper and had a shitload of tapes, and we kind of looked through them, and then Kit just stood out, so we cast Kit. And you know, we made some changes. Obviously Alina is not supposed to be, you know, like Mal, they're all white, but we made some changes. But like for us, the big thing was, you know, like, what are they supposed to be? Let's honor what they're supposed to be and like go for that. So it's an interesting process because it's just really hard. You just look through a shitload of tapes, you know, like I don't remember how many we had for Alina. I mean, it was like it was hundreds. It was literally hundreds of auditions. And then like, you know, for future characters that we are going to cast that I can neither confirm nor deny that we may have in the books, but if you're in the show, but you know, if you've read the books, there may be some people that you expect to see, and perhaps they will show up. It's just a matter of us knowing like what they need to be, and then just looking through a buttload of tapes is really what it's going to come down to. Looking through a crap load of tapes and then just asking ourselves, you know, who it is. And then on top of that, for certain instances, there are times where you also want to do chemistry reads where it's just like you want to have actors play off of each other to see, because like if there are certain things are supposed to be there, you want to make sure they're there. So yeah, it's just a very long, arduous process of going through a bunch of tapes and then asking for more tapes and then asking for more tapes. So yeah, that's really what it all comes down to.
I mean, with Nikolai as a character, speaking purely just from the source material, because like we're neither confirming nor denying that he will be in season 2, but one of the headcanons that I was thinking about of like, okay, if I worked on Shadow and Bone in my imaginary world of like, how would I approach the character? One of the things that was just fun of just a like an imagination exercise was I kind of liked the idea of him being mixed as well, but very white passing because of so we're kind of getting into book spoilers here, so if you don't want to be here, then like bye, see you in the next one, thank you for watching. But you know, there's a story surrounding like, is this person his father or not, you know, so there's that doubt. And I think that since the show has already kind of got into certain issues regarding being mixed, and I feel like that would add another dimension to that conversation of the mixed experience of kind of passing privilege, but also like kind of claim, and also I think it just plays really well into the drama of the stakes of if his true parentage is outed, you know, of like his claim to the throne, if that's going to be threatened. So like, I'm not in any way trying to sway you. It's just fun for us to talk just like of creative imagination, that whole perspective. I was like, well, what if, and then someone was saying, because I haven't read the most recent books. I've only read the trilogy and the duology. I've not read like the new books, but they were saying, oh, he's actually Fjerden. But then I was like, okay, but like native Sami people, like, and then I still, and also it's a fantasy world, so I was like, you know, just make him like very, you know, like a little.
So I will say this about Nikolai on the book side of things. The thing that I love on the book side of things for Nikolai is that like parenting and heritage, regardless, because he is Fjerden. Like the thing with Nikolai that I have always found amazing is that Nikolai, his identity crisis doesn't have anything to do with his race and everything to do with his position in his lineage. Because he has identity issues. Like in the books, you know, he's a guy named Sturmhond who's a privateer / pirate, regardless of what everyone's going to say. I'm always just like, fucking privateer. But like, you know, he plays parts. And like the real Nikolai is a really hard person to get to because he essentially wears masks all along the way. Like he pretends to be a certain person. He has to play a role. So
but
like,
how is that any different from being like mixed or being like
Multicultural.
multicultural?
Like, this is what I'm saying. Even without the like, even if he weren't mixed, even if he were straight, there is a lot to talk about there in terms of his identity issues being on par with somebody who is mixed, where it's just like, what am I? Who am I?
Do we see the commonality of like the will they, won't they between him and Alina? Which like, I will say though, like this is not how I feel about the show. This was purely me reading the books because my feelings towards certain characters in the books was very different from how I felt towards certain characters in the show. But like when I was reading the trilogy for the first time, and the fact that I was aware going into it that the main love triangle was Alina, Mal, and the Darkling. But then as soon as Nikolai showed up and he was expressing even any bit of interest in her, I was like, girl, this is not even a contest. If that's an option, that's clearly the only option. Like, what are you talking about? But we love Archie. I love Mal on the show. So like, I don't want anyone taking this and spinning it like I'm trying to tear those two apart because I don't.
You're talking about the book version of Mal and the book version of Nikolai. You know, like, listen, I cannot confirm or deny whether or not Nikolai is in the show. I mean, if you've read the books, it probably would make sense, right? But that being said, like, also, I cannot say anything. But also,
we're talking about the books
again. Well, so aside from the books, something to remember. And this again isn't exclusive to Mal or Alina or Nikolai. It's just like whenever you cast an actor, you are casting a person who is going to put their spin on something, which inevitably always changes the character to a certain extent. Like the Ben Barnes version of the Darkling is not the same as the Ben Barnes version of the Darkling in the books. So for one thing, in the books, he's like 20. You know, he looks like an 18-year-old and he's like 1,000 years old. But Ben Barnes clearly doesn't look like a 20-year-old. He looks like a man. So like, you know, it just kind of like, I think the thing that is delightful for me working on a TV adaptation of something is because the actors bring so much, it allows me to divorce myself from whatever relationships or like specifics are in the book on a certain character. You know, there's a heart that you want to maintain, but there's a freedom in like passing that torch on to somebody and being like, you were cast because we see the heart in you, but now where are you going to take that? So like that's all I'm going to say about
No, I'm sure like the fans can go spin this. They can have their little gears turning of like, is she speaking to us in code? It's like, no, but if you want to, if that's a way to pass the time for you, then by all means.
I will say this. I have, since season 1, had a fan cast in my head for who I think Nikolai should be. Since season 1, literally in the room, I like pressed like.
Have they auditioned? Oh no, that would confirm if he's in the show. Never mind.
No. Well, so this is what I'm going to say. Wylan and Nikolai are two people that I have had fan cast in my head since season 1. The odds of either of them being cast, if these characters were to show up in the show, are as minuscule as everyone who contacts me on Twitter and asks me to like cast somebody else. Like, it's tiny, because the reality is we all have our own fan cast. But I will say this, if either of them ever show up and the cast is announced, if they show up, if they are cast, I will on Twitter say who in my head I pictured for these characters since season 1. So like, but now I cannot.
Yeah, well, I'm just assuming like that I have not fan cast either one of them, even just in a hypothetical sense, because almost all of the lead performers on the first season were people that I either wasn't familiar with them at all, or I only knew them a little bit. Like I'd seen Freddy on Pennyworth, but that was basically 1 or 2 episodes. So he's not one of the main characters. And so I feel like I would rather just leave it open to it. I kind of like the idea of being surprised, you know?
Well, this is why it's kind of futile to fan cast something. You learn this when you're working in television. Like, I can sit there and tell you, you know, like who I would want for certain characters. And, you know, there are times where you go to a certain actor and you're like, you know, like, can we get an audition from them? And then you see the audition is completely wrong and somebody you completely didn't expect ends up being the right person. That's why, like, I mean, I can sit there and just be like, these are the people that I imagined for these roles, and none of them get cast. Like, that's what inevitably ends up happening, where it's just like the odds of the person you have in your head being the right person are not always going to be that. So, like, it's hilarious because, like, we get sent all of these, like, fan cast stuff, and it's just like, you know, even if you were working on this show, the odds of you getting that person that you're asking for very low, because somebody is going to come out of fucking nowhere and do a tape that is incredible, and you're like, this person was always meant to be this. I have never heard of them. You know what I mean? Like, that is what ends up happening.
Yeah. Most of the casting I don't think has like the casting that's actually happened for the people that we've already seen on the show. I don't think most of them give fan cast energy because they've been largely unknown performers. But one thing that I will say gave me fan cast energy was Luke Pasqualino. Like, I had to give him the shout out once more, even though I brought him up last time, but I have to mention it again just to, like, you know, not even subliminally, but just to outright, like, demand more David in season 2. And, like, I'm manifesting this, that Luke, I don't care what other gigs you have, like, you need to be there on set. I don't work on set, but, like, I'm demanding it nonetheless because we need more Luke Pasqualino.
All I'm going to say, first of all, I love Luke Pasqualino. So the fact that he auditioned for the show, I literally ran around the room screaming, Luke Pasqualino auditioned for the show. I fucking love him. So that I love. And then the other thing I'll say is, like, the room loves David. So we love David. Like, that's all I'm going to say. We love David. And I, as a fan of the books before working on the show, have always loved David. So that's like,
so another thing that you and I have talked a fair bit about, not in interviews, is something you got me into, a Korean drama called Vincenzo, which I ended up finishing before you. But actually, it's a funny thing to bring up about Vincenzo, because one of the things you told me was that Shadow and Bone was very successful when it came out. It was #1 in a lot of different countries, a lot of different regions, but you could not crack #1 in the Asian market because Vincenzo had a chokehold on the Asian markets. And the funny thing, I promise I'm not bringing this up just for us to go on a side tangent that has nothing to do with Shadow and Bone. One of the things you told me privately, which hopefully you're okay with me saying publicly, because you know, if ever there's anything that comes up, if you need me to cut it out, I can. But one of the things you told me was that the main villain on Vincenzo, which, okay, spoilers for Vincenzo, by the way, like, really sorry, not sorry. It's been a huge hit. If you haven't watched it already, like, it's not my problem. But the main villain, who's this, oh my God, he's so pretty. Let's not get distracted by that. But one of the things you told me was that the main villain on Vincenzo, by watching the show and watching him do his villain, I don't even want to call them shenanigans, because he is so much more diabolical than the Darkling. Yeah. Sorry, not sorry. Terrorized me emotionally and psychologically. But you said that you understood the Darkling better as a character by watching Vincenzo and seeing this villain, whose name I'm going to butcher because it's Korean, Jang Jun-woo?
Jung Jun-woo, yeah. So
Jung Jun-woo, okay.
The actor is Taekyeon. He's amazing. So I watched Vincenzo and I had a moment where I just, because, you know, like, working on Shadow and Bone, I understand all of these characters. And I know there are a lot of Darkling fans out there. it's not that I hate the Darkling. That is not what I'm saying. But like the Darkling, I'm also just like, I'm a 40-year-old woman. Like I dated the Darkling in college. You know, I like legit had a boyfriend as shitty. But like, I'm always just like, I totally appreciate fan standing the Darkling. I get it. I totally
And Ben
understand.
Barnes he has the face that he has, so like we get it.
Like I don't want him to get a big head because he's like, you know, he's Ben Barnes. He's attractive. He should know this. So I watched Vincenzo and I was like, oh no, I love this villain too much. He is such a shit and I love him. And oh no, I totally understand the Darkling fandom. So like it did weirdly help me because the other thing is like when you're in the headspace of writing a show, like you have to understand your characters inside and out, and it gives you a different perspective. You are not just enjoying them, you are trying to understand their motivations for things. And so when I was watching Vincenzo, because I don't have to be in Jung Jung-woo's head, I can just watch him do terrible shit and laugh and just be like, surprise! And I'm just like, oh fuck, I'm real into this guy. It was great. I love that you got into the show. I think people need to understand that I was seriously like 6 or 7 episodes in, and it is a 20 episode long show, and they are long. They are 1 hour to 1.5 hour long episodes because Korean dramas don't fuck around. And like all of a sudden, you lapped me so hard. I mean, I was like so behind and on script and like desperately trying to watch episodes while also working, and you'd just be like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm on episode 13, and you'd be like, oh my God. It was so good. Oh, and I feel terrible because the poor Shadow and Bone Room had to hear me, and I'd just be like, Vincenzo has a pigeon.
That was such an important character arc of Vincenzo being annoyed by pigeons, and then he's like, okay, maybe I'll feed the pigeon. And then the pigeons literally save his life. Like, again, I'm spoiling it. I don't care. It's been out. You had the time. Bye.
There's a scene between Vincenzo and Chaeyoung where he's just like, she's just talking about how like Injagi the pigeon probably shit all over the roof, and he's just like, don't talk bad about Injagi. That was probably the other pigeons. And I'm just like, this show cracks me up. But yeah, they had their own version of Milo, which was delightful. Like that show, I think about this every once in a while about how you and I should just do reviews of K-dramas. I should feed you a K-drama to watch so that you and I can just like,
I told you that if you want to come back and we can just do a talk about Vincenzo, like spoiler talk, obviously, because there's no way to tiptoe. Like you have to get into the juicy drama because then it'll give me, you know, the opportunity to talk about my person.
Yes!
Who like, first of all, when I found this photo, I was like, I'm using this because this is so deceptive. This is such a deceptive photo of like what this character actually is. Does not look like this. Like his energy does not look like this at all. Like, but you know, this is they lure you in. They make you think like, oh, this is the character, and like, surprise, bitch, no, this is the character.
The fact
this is the character. This is the character. Spoilers, but I don't care because this is my baby. Like, I will protect him at all costs.
You love him. I
really like himbos. I'm sorry. I'm not going to apologize.
The fact that like his arc is portrayed through wardrobe also, like he wears this like uptight collar that is pinned in a way that feels like a dog collar. Like it's so tight around his neck when he's under his brother's like will, and then as he slowly starts to like pull away from him, it like he stops wearing the pins and it's a little looser. He starts to unbutton the top button and the tie is a little looser. And then when he's his purest form, he's not wearing a suit. And it's just like the fucking arc that they give him is just like, Tanzo, I love you so much.
I love him. I love him so much. Like as soon as he started to show his himbo-ness, I was like, oh no. Like this is my baby. Like what, you know what it is? I've always been this, like I always liked Luke Skywalker. When I watched the original trilogy as a child in Japan at my grandparents' house, like on VHS, I always liked Luke Skywalker more than I liked Han Solo. Like I don't like bad people. I don't like, because I think I was just always, I'm not going to talk about my personal life, but I was just always aware, like, I don't like bad guys. I don't. I like nice good-hearted people. That's just what gets me going. So that's why, you know, with watching Shadow and Bone, as soon as, you know, within episode 1, you immediately are informed, like, this is who Mal is. I was like, oh no, I love him. I love him.
And then Archie does such a good job with him. Like, I could go on about, I think I'm in the same boat as you, where it's just like, I dated some really terrible people. One in particular, I had a really terrible, like, abusive college boyfriend. And since then, the only time I really find villains really appealing is when they're really funny, which is one of the reasons that JoJo was so appealing to me.
Oh my God, his dramatic reveal.
His character reveal is one of the most brilliant means of hiding exposition, where it's like, all right, if you haven't seen the show, you should just go see the show. But like, there's a scene where he reveals to like a room full of people, his brother is there, and his brother knows, because his brother has been the fake CEO of this company. And so he's revealing to these other two characters that he, even though they thought he was an intern, a dumbass puppy intern, he's actually the secret head of this like crazy company. He does it in a PowerPoint slideshow. And it's the funniest thing I've ever seen, because you get across his parental lineage, you get all this technical information that normally exposition would just be like, I want to like fall asleep and like roll under a table and not listen to this. But because he does it in this hilarious PowerPoint slideshow where he's just like presenting himself and then talking about how he went to Stanford and he wasn't the best student, but he was a really good one. You're just like dying because it's so funny. And so like that for me was, that character was amazing. He gets progressively less funny as he gets more murdery, but you know, it was good while it lasted.
I was genuinely upset watching that show.
The thing with K-drama is they're happier now than they used to be. The thing about K-drama used to be that they made you fall in love with characters so deeply and then they kill them. And it was just like, is it cancer? Is it a car hitting them? Whatever. Characters can't find happiness. You got to complete an arc, an emotional arc, become a better person, and then die. Like, that's just how it is. I'm telling you right now, hear you me, I really need to get you to watch Uncanny Counter, because that show is full of characters you will fall in love with. And then you and I should watch Monster, because I haven't seen that yet. But
well, I mean, if they're as long as Vincenzo, I mean, like I'm in the middle of, I already know what video essay I'm doing next, and I know it's going to take me a while. I'm not going to spoil the topic on this, but yeah, it's going to be another, I don't want to go as deep as I did for my last one, because like the fact that I went so deep last time and like nobody watched it, I'm like, okay, are you just not ready to hear me spill the tea about like the evil 1980s politicians that ruined the world? Like, okay, bye. Yeah. But yeah, maybe, you know, maybe I can fit in another K-drama before the end of this year, but it's just, it took a while. It ate up all, I was doing nothing else.
None of them are as long as Vincenzo, man. Like 16, I think, is about the length of a long, like an average one. Sometimes they're shorter, but like Vincenzo, I just remember being like, it's 20? Like, I started watching it and got into it before realizing the episode count, because I was like, oh, like 16. And I kept going, and I was like, how is it so long? It's so long. Yeah.
That is wild that they're just like, oh yeah, do all the episodes. And Shadow and Bone couldn't even get more than 8. And I'm like, you needed 10. Like, I say that with love. I don't want you thinking that I'm being passive aggressive to your ability to do your job. But I just mean it in the sense of like, it's so densely packed, and yet there was still so much else that definitely could have been done more. But like we talked in the last interview of why it was 8 instead of 10. But it's just like, you know, I hope, I mean, I know you can't say anything, so you don't even address it like I'm asking you, but it's just like, I would hope that they would give you the money to do at least 10. I mean, if I was even being generous, I feel like if you were really desperate to do 12 or 13, I feel like you guys could pull it off, because 8, you did 8 and it was packed.
I know.
So
I know. You know, like, if I had choices, and I don't, you know, Magicians was a 13 episode show. Like, I loved that. I thought it was great. I think those half season lengths are really good. And 10 is also manageable. 8 is a really tough one. And I think that the landscape of US television is heading more towards like 6 and 8 episodes, which is much more British. What's interesting is, like, when you talk about I don't know the business side of it in Korea, but my assumption is that the Netflix Korean business model is much more catering towards the way Koreans do their television, which is why Vincenzo is the way that it is, because it doesn't adhere to like the American standard of like an hour long episode is like 40 minutes to 50 minutes. In Korea, the lengths of their television shows vary much more. Like you'll have an hour long episode or you'll have an hour and a half long episode. It's just a little bit dependent on like what the show needs and what their setup is. But they also have like 2 writers for an entire season of television, which I'm just like, I don't know how.
That blew my mind when I felt like it was more or less one writer for the entire thing of Vincenzo. And I was going, how?
I don't know. I don't know.
Are they paying you enough? How?
Never.
The amount of stuff that happens in Vincenzo and the amount of things that have to be sustained. It's not just like 20 procedural episodes where you don't have to maintain continuity and arcs across the entire season. So much stuff builds over the entire thing. And yeah, anyway.
Dude, okay, so this is wild. I may not know at all what I'm talking about. I remember seeing a small VFX clip thing on Vincenzo. I made the insane assumption that they shot the parts of the first episode in Italy. Because like the show opens up in Italy, and I was like, they flew to Italy for a little splinter unit and shot this
Netflix
scene.
does stuff like that, so it's not unheard of.
They didn't. I could be completely wrong. I saw a VFX thing, and I'm positive they shot in Korea with huge green screens and just fucking VFX Italy. And I was like, is that cheaper? I don't know. So like, because I don't know how much that show, I don't know what their budget was, I don't know what their setup was. I just remember seeing a VFX thing and I was like, are you kidding me? Holy crap. So yeah, it was, they did extensions and everything. And I was just like, I made the silly assumption thinking they just flew to, that was silly American of me to think
it's not an unheard of assumption to make, because when La Casa de Papel was acquired by Netflix to continue, because it was originally airing in Spain on a Spanish network and then it got canceled, but then it was doing so well on Netflix that they just went, we'll pick it up. Once Netflix got a hold of it and Netflix was the one funding it, then they started shooting in numerous different countries on location. So I mean, but that was also one of their biggest worldwide hits. God, I'm so excited to see the final season, but let's not get on that tangent. We do need to, there were some very important things that I wanted to get into related to Shadow and Bone, because we talked a little bit about this before I started recording. There's, you obviously know what my thoughts are related to the show addressing more serious issues, particularly related to racism against Asian, I guess we'll be more specific, especially to East Asians, but not only to East Asians, and also the racism and the struggle of being mixed. So there are some people, now I want to be fair that like, no matter what you make, no matter what you release, there will be people who like it and people who don't like it. So I don't want to try to make it seem like a bunch of people hate it and nobody likes it. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But there are some people who seem to not quite understand the inclusion of racism in the story, and the fact that, the character of Alina was not originally Asian in the books, and she was changed to be Asian, and then it opened things up to address certain issues. So before I even allow you to clarify and contextualize a lot of the creative process behind creating these stories and addressing these issues, I want to make sure that I give my thoughts on it so that I'm like making my stance very clear on this, because if anything, I'm very put off by certain hostile or negative things that have been said about the inclusion of racism in the story. So for one, I'm going to try to TLDR it, because I know that we don't have just an unlimited amount of time together. For one, there's the whole model minority thing where historically, I believe that the historian's name is Ellen Wu, but I could be misremembering that. She wrote an article and she went super in depth to explain the history of the model minority, especially as it relates to the US historical setting. But I mean, we won't get into how it manifests in other regions just because there's no time. So with the model minority, one of the really, really negative byproducts of it, because the model minority was born from a place of just trying to get the people who are most in power to stop being so racist to Asians. And it was at the same time that the Black community was also trying to, like, I think it was something that started to become more prevalent in like the 1960s during the civil rights movement. I could be misremembering the decade, but I like how I said I would TLDR this, and I'm literally turning this into a history lesson. But basically, the people who were in power decided to be a little bit less racist to Asians because they felt like they could spin that in their favor to try to give themselves better PR to the people that they were trying to be politically involved with and negotiating with overseas. And they didn't want to have the bad PR of like, well, you are really bad to how you treat your own minorities. So they started to be nicer to Asians a little bit. But the problem is that, so like the model minority, one of the unexpected byproducts of it is that now people use the model minority to weaponize it against the Asian community in a couple of ways. One of them being they try to claim that racism against Asians doesn't exist. I think we've all found very clearly over the last year that it does very much exist, and not just in the, like you're saying, kind of a rude, offensive comment, in like a way where literally people's lives are in danger. I'm going to try not to cry on this call, but like we know I'm a stress crier. I just went over this. And the other thing that I think people are really not, so the point that I'm trying to make here with that is that you need to have stories that show that racism exists against Asians, because it's something that not a lot of people clearly understand exists in the first place, even though it very much does. The other point that I would like to make is that when people are asking like, well, why is there so much racism specifically against, you know, the East Asian lead, but there are other like types of people of color in the larger ensemble, and there's not always like the same severity of racism against them. And this is like, again, I'm trying to figure out how to condense this. So the way imperialism works is that when people in power decide that they want something from another region, then they want to deem a certain group the enemy, that propaganda poster, I think people really don't understand how important that propaganda poster is because like if you look into even just the way Hollywood was used as a tool and enabled racism against Japanese people during World War II, to be like, oh, well, they're the enemy. There's so much, like, look at these films that were coming out during like World War II. It's very like racist against Japanese people, you know, and that relates to like Japanese internment. So the fact that there's propaganda in there is very important, because that means that there's a larger systemic thing that there's just not enough time to convey. So the propaganda poster is the way you try to condense it and be more clear in communicating that to the audience, is that the entire people of that region are being propagandized. I don't know if I use that word grammatically accurately, because I'm like my mind is racing trying to communicate all of this, that, you know, that they're being brainwashed into being like, that's the enemy specifically. So and also I think some things that people don't seem to remember a lot of times is that there's only 8 episodes. We can't exposition dump every detail of world building that you feel like would clarify things more the way you would like them to be clarified, like you know. So I think there's just a real misunderstanding of history. I think there's a real misunderstanding, not on your end, the people who are being like, why is there racism in this story? And this is something that needs to be told. So I feel like I've overstayed my rant. I'm really sorry, but I really wanted to make it clear that I don't feel like it was improperly communicated at all. And I needed to be able to share that before you gave your answer, so I'm not just piggybacking off of what you've said. So, you know, when I hear the types of half-baked takes claiming that it's wrong for the show to be having racism happening against Asians to address something that's really serious and needs to be addressed, you know, it really offends me deeply, profoundly. So I don't think that you were, I don't think any of you failed in telling a story that needed to be told the way that it was told. So sorry that I went on such a long rant, but like I really, you know, I got myself worked up. I got some of it out before we started recording, but now you can give your half of that.
I get it, because it is a difficult thing to discuss. I want to preface this by saying this. And I said this to the writer's room, where I was like, you know, obviously I'm getting tagged in a lot of like comments about the feelings about the way that racism is portrayed in the show by Asians and non-Asians. And my whole thing has always been like, I get why people are angry, because quite frankly, there's not enough representation in general. Like, you know, the sheer fact that all of us are looking to any sort of Asian American representation or Asian, you know, diaspora representation to see ourselves is not fair. And so like the fact that you don't get to see yourself portrayed in the way that you want to be portrayed is not fair. And I get the anger behind that. I also totally get that the world that we live in right now, this is what we're living. You know, this is not a choice that we had. this is the kind of what Alina is going through is something that we're all going through right now collectively as a diaspora, and that's not fair and that sucks. And I'm going to try not to cry too. That being said, when we wrote the show in 2019, obviously we didn't know where the world was going to be, and one of the things that we wanted to make sure we got right was like, this is a world that's fucking hard that she lives in. We were referencing World War II. Japanese Americans who had to serve, Asian Americans in general who had to serve at that time, who had to live with things like those fucking propaganda posters. Like all the world that, people lived in back then was not pleasant. It was not free of conflict. It was not like they were, seen as the model minority, then they were seen as the fucking enemy. And quite frankly, that's the world that we wanted to make sure that like, we clearly stated Alina lived in, because had we done the version of it where it was completely colorblind and every person of color in that show doesn't have to deal with anything, that's not helpful either. Like my own dad, my white father has said to me on multiple occasions, like Asians don't have to deal with racism. And it makes me angry because like I never tell him about the times that I've had racism thrown my way because I'm Asian, because I'm recognized as being an other. It's just bullshit. So like the version of the show in the alternate universe where we did a colorblind version of it that came out at this time is quite frankly offensive to a completely different group of people who are just like, this is bullshit. We are living this world where we are getting killed for being Asian. And this fucking show is portraying this woman as having like the easiest time. Like that's not realistic. So the place that I live in right now with the choices that we made is like, I don't have regrets about it, because I'm just like, the story that we told with Alina, I think is true to the world that we were trying to portray, and it's accurate. And quite frankly, I understand why people are mad. I understand that some people are just like, I am not in a place to watch this. I am not in a headspace to be okay with this. I get that. I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling that way. But I also don't think that the version of it that is completely devoid of that is better. It has its own set of problems. And so all of this is all of these emotions are stemming from the fact that we just don't have enough material. Like, quite frankly, it's just, we don't have enough material for us. And I feel awful about that. And and it's a huge chunk of my goal as a TV writer to make more of it. But the truth of the matter is, I can't make one thing that is going to please everybody, that is going to be perfect, that is going to be the perfect version of the Asian story that we need to be telling people right now. Like, there is no fucking version of that show. So, like, I'm proud of what we did. It would have made 15-year-old me happy. And, like, I'm just going to go make more. Like, it's going to be all, you tell different stories and you do your best. And, like, I'm sorry to the people who feel the way that they feel. Like, I don't want you to be in pain, and I understand that it comes from a place of hurt. But, like, also, like, if we had done the version of it that didn't show, I would just be proving my dad right. Yeah. And that's not true. That's not accurate at all. So, yeah. And then on top of that, like, there's a lot that went into the show that comes from my own personal life. So, I understand how painful it is to watch, because it was fucking hard for me to hear some of those things. So, like, I get it. I completely get it. But do I think we should have pulled it out? I don't think we should have pulled it out. Because,
yeah. And I mean, again, like, with the timing of us doing this interview is interesting because I had just done this video essay that required, well, I mean, I'm not required to do it. It's my channel. I can do what I want. But to do the video that I wanted to do the way that I wanted to do it, I had to do a lot of reading and a lot of deep diving into stuff that was going on in the 1980s. And as someone who was not alive in the 1980s, I don't have the firsthand recollection to draw on to guide me. So I really was going in, only having like a few snippets of, oh, I've heard that happened, and like, let me start there and just go from there. But there was a lot of propaganda that really evil imperialist political leaders were levying against a lot of different groups for different reasons. One of them being, there was a lot of propaganda being perpetuated about Latin America to try to justify going in to destabilize regions, destabilize different, look into Salvador Allende. If any of you are watching this and you want to, get yourself mad but the thing is like, what was wild to learn about it, which is, I think, another reason why I'm so heated in talking about this, is that when I read about some of the stuff that was happening, like, you know, with Salvador Allende in Chile, and the way, you know, claims were made and things were spun to try to justify going in and destabilizing Chile's democratic process, you know, it's Chile. The Chileans, they vote on what they want to do because it's their home. Like, let them do what they want to do, you know, like, mind your own business. But then, you know, they're like spinning all this stuff and trying to make it into something that that it's not, to justify like going in. And what really made me mad was realizing that this is still happening. People are constantly going in and trying to destabilize, and the way they try to justify that is by putting out propaganda. So I think people, they see that propaganda poster in Shadow and Bone and they don't really understand like the significance. It's not just there as wall dressing. It's not just there as like a backdrop, a bit of exposition. It's like what that relates to in the real, like, the negative backlash that I've seen against the idea of racism being in the story, or like the way that it was executed, to me, the only way that I can look at that negative reaction is that it's an indictment on the education system of whomever is like having that reaction, that you've not been properly informed, or you've not taken the initiative to try to educate yourself on how these things work. Because like now, if I were to go back and rewatch Shadow and Bone, I'm so much more heated when I see that propaganda poster, because I have so much stronger of an idea of what that means in real, like the real world that we live in. That means something, you know? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the function of that poster is the anger you are supposed to feel is very accurate. Like, you are supposed to feel that way and understand that she fucking lives there. You know, that's like what she has to deal with on a regular basis. The world that we put her in, and again, I understand that not everybody wants to be there right now. I understand that some of us want comfort storytelling, and some of us need to just be taken away in the escapism of it all. But that's not this show. That's not this show. The show is not a light and fluffy escapist fantasy. It's just not. It is a show dealing with like difficult life truths and like trauma and like all this. It's not, okay, I mean, it is light and fluffy there. They're that right there is your escapism. They are so cute. But like, you know, totally, we're not, I wouldn't call this necessarily a sweet comfort show. You know, it is not British Bake Off, which is my comfort show.
But that's also what makes me mad, is like, if you want the kind of lightweight, fluffy stuff, you already have a list in your head of what brings you those feelings, and just watch that.
This does come back to the whole notion that, you know, like, Asian diaspora want more of that for us. Like, and this is, it's not fucking fair. Like, we should definitely have more of it. But then I'm also just like, fucking watch Vincenzo. Watch The Pigeon.
I mean, if you can't handle Shadow and Bone, I promise you cannot handle Vincenzo, because the havoc that they wreak on you, and when you get emotionally invested in the story, oh no, you're gonna struggle.
Counter, I highly recommend Uncanny Counter. I'm also gonna start watching Startup. It's very cute. Like, there are a lot. There are light and fluffy material, but like, yeah, I wouldn't call. I mean, Shadow and Bone has some really hard shit to watch. It's not nearly as hard as some shows. Like, I'm going through Mayor of Easttown right now. It's not Mayor of Easttown.
Well, another thing that I've seen come up, you know, once or twice, is people saying like, well, why does Alina get it worse than Mal? And there's like a two-part to that I would say purely as a viewer. Number one, if you've read the books, I won't elaborate on it, but if you've read stuff in the books, there is stuff to do with Mal's backstory that like could complicate that, but I'm not going to get too far into that, because let's like at least try not to completely spoil where the show would most likely be going, since it is adapting source material. But the other thing that I think is important to remember is that when you're a woman, like, I'm not saying that Asian men don't receive violence. We've seen elderly Asian men getting attacked. So like, that is a thing.
Yes.
But when you're a woman, when you're an Asian woman, there's a very specific type of kind of hypersexualization that, like, there's a racialized misogyny. Yeah. And again, if you're not aware of this, then you're not the right person to be trying to act like it wasn't done right, because the show outright shows you in that one encounter after she's escaped from the Darkling's palace, and there are these soldier men who, they see her, they identify her as being Shu, and then they try to SA her. I'm trying to be YouTube friendly. Then they try to like grab her with this specific intention to SA her. And I'm really sorry to break it to you, children who maybe have lived a happy enough life that you've not seen or experienced or learned that these things are very real. But like, I, as an Asian woman, like I've had situations where people say comments to me rooted in that type of energy.
Yeah.
And so like, again, you know, it's not like Mal's not in danger too, but again, part of this again comes from, there's only 8 episodes.
Here's the other thing I really want to point out. There's a huge difference between Mal and Alina on multiple levels. First of all, you know, she gets racism at the orphanage. They both do. They both get racism at the orphanage. Kids are fucking cruel. Like, the reality is kids are cruel. And at that time, they're both getting shit. They get into the military. Quite frankly, women get shit in the military. She's a woman. And not only is she a woman, she's an Asian woman. By the time Mal is an adult, he is much bigger. He's broing down with dudes. It's a very different dynamic the two of them are living. She is a smaller Asian woman who's a map maker, and she's in the military, and she's getting picked on for looking more like the enemy than Mal. That's another thing. Alina is so much more clearly mixed than Mal is. Mal is a lot more passing. Third, and I think this is the most important, she is a living saint. And the sheer fact that she is a living saint that doesn't look like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed image that the Robkins all would have expected from that person is an offense. So she gets racism thrown at her because she doesn't look like the savior they all wanted her to look like. So part of the reason that Alina gets in the instances that she's in, where she gets all of these things thrown at her, is because she's a woman who is in a position of power and she is Asian. Like, quite frankly, like, in all of those scenarios, these are things that happen in real life. So like, her versus Mal, like the positions that the two of them are in, she gets more shit because she dares to be a woman who's not 1000% white, who is in a position of power and doesn't look like what they all expected her to look like. She's not the traditional hero. So like, yes, she gets all of this stuff thrown at her. And I think that like, this is just true life. Like, look at the world we live in. So yeah, I mean, that's just my whole thing. You know, and these are all discussions that we have behind the scenes in the writer's room. Like, you know, the huge chunk of the writer's room is women, and like 2 of us are women of color. And like, these are very frank discussions that we all have about all of this stuff, where it's just like, this is what you have to go through. This is like sort of shit we all have to survive. Like, this is the kind of things that we endure. The passing comments, you know, like the, you know, it's not hard. It's hard being a woman, dude. It's much harder being a woman than a dude.
Yeah. And I mean, I think people also who are maybe younger and don't understand the mechanics of how the industry goes, and maybe they don't pay attention to a lot of the behind the scenes things that have been coming out, I guess in a way, thankfully, more prevalently the last however many years, more people have been able to come forward about what's been happening. But to be quite frank, I mean, I don't know if it's like a poor choice of words, but to me, it's almost a gift in a way to be able to tell a story authentically, yes, addressing these things without having a white man showrunner telling you, no, that's not actually how you experience racism. Because I don't want to name names specifically in this interview, just because I don't want to distract from what you and I specifically are talking about and make it about other people. But there are a lot of names that are now out there where people, you know, not just Asian women, but, you know, like women from a lot of different backgrounds, or even men, you know, like people have come forward and said, like, my toxic boss would not allow me to blah, blah, blah. They were terrorized, you know, and it's not down to just like Eric being a nice person and just how he interacts with you, but the fact that he's actually giving all of you the space to say, this is the reality of how my life is and how it's affected by these issues. And I want to put that into this story and tell it like it is. And because we see butchered versions of things that are supposed to address these issues all the time. And it's so refreshing to actually watch one that is like, that where I'm watching and I'm like, yeah, yeah. Like me as a mixed Asian woman, I'm watching, I'm like, yeah,
Let me
that's,
brag
yeah.
on my boss for a split second. I'm going to brag on Eric.
Eric, please come on my channel. I want to interview you. I'm manifesting. He's not even watching this, but like I'm manifesting Eric.
He is so lovely. Like I can't, he listens to everybody in the room and he leans heavily on some of us. And like, I mean, to be quite frank, we've had several very awkward conversations in the room where like people have expressed like, I don't think we should do this way. I think we should do it this way. In my experience, this doesn't make any sense. We should do this. And like, he listens. Like, listen, writers can be super defensive of things and just be like, I don't like what this is saying, or I don't like what it's implying about me. But he listens. Like, he listens to all of it. And so, like, there is so much in that show where, like, all of us in the room, because, we have queer writers, we have biracial writers, like, mixed race writers, we have, like, several women. The divide of the room in terms of gender is heavily female. Like, he listens to us, and it is so refreshing to have a showrunner who has so little ego, like no ego, to the point that we can have these really awkward conversations with him, and he's just like, there's a lot to take in, but yeah, cool, let's do that. Like, he's great. And I think it's a testament. It is a testament to a show when almost the entire room comes back for a second season. Like, it really is. Like, it says so much. Like, there's always the question of availability, so I don't want anybody to like go look at shows and be like, well, that show only got half of its staff back. What does that say about that show? Sometimes it's a matter of like, it wasn't a good mix. But like, when you have a show where almost the entire room, if not the entire room, comes back, it's a show that people want to be on. It is probably a really good room dynamic, and it is a showrunner that you're very loyal to. Like it's all the earmarks of a really good working environment. And Eric is like delightful. Like I love him to the moon and back. And I've been super lucky because I have so far only worked for showrunners that I really like. And I hope to continue that tradition, but who knows? But like, yeah, Eric has been I highly recommend my stamp of approval. If you get a chance to work for him, by all means do it. He's lovely.
Eric, do you need a PA? Like, how do you take your coffee? Like, I'm fully available and willing. Actually, I did want to ask a bit about, so the show addresses racism quite a lot, and I like, we've already gone through all of that, but we also have Jesper's his cute little hookup. Okay. But there's, at least from, this could just be a matter of there not being enough time. And I was trying to, it's been a while since I read the books. I think I read them all last year, but it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of phobia or bigotry against people for having a different sexuality. So I guess, I don't know, maybe this is a question of if you've ever asked Lee this, like, does homophobia exist in the Grishaverse? Or is that like the thing that, no, we're all like, this is the more fantasy version of, in this world, you can just be attracted to whomever, like gender wise, and that's not really an issue.
Well, it's interesting because, like, and I don't want to speak for Lee because we've talked a little bit about this, but not to an extent that I feel comfortable, like, saying how she feels about things. But the impression that I get from the books is that it depends on where you are. Because, like, in Fjerda is not cool. They are not cool with, same-sex things. They are not forward thinking in terms of, like, sexuality or gender. Clearly.
Yeah, we saw that on the show, but let's not get into that.
It's not the country I would pick to live in. So, like, I think it just kind of depends on the area you're in. Like, her world building is so extensive that she is very specific about what's okay where and what's not okay where, which I think is, like, fair because culturally in the world that we live in, this is the reality. Like, in Asia, there's one country you can get gay married in. It's like Taiwan or bust, like, you can't. In the US, you can find, like, we can now all get married, but like, it wasn't like that like 10, 15 years ago. So I think that, like, the impression that I walked away with in the books is that in Ketterdam, it's okay. Like, your gender, like, your sexuality is not as big an issue as, like, you know, in the case of Six of Crows, Wylan or Crooked Kingdom, Wylan can't read. That's a bigger issue. And I think it's pertinent to the way that that world is set up in a, you know, in a country where, in a city where they've got like brothels and legal prostitution and fucking indentured servants, like, you know, sexuality is not on their radar. Inability to read is. So I think it's just dependent on the world that they're in. So yeah, and then on top of that, like on the Shadow and Bone side of things, Nadia and Tamar in the books, you know, Tamar is a privateer, and I don't think pirates give a shit. You know what I mean? So it's interesting because like I in the books I don't recollect that being a massive issue. I recall the bigger issues having a lot more to do with whatever the personal story is, but I do know in Fierda it's not okay. So I think it's just dependent on where you are.
Mm-hmm. Another one of the serious issues that comes up with a few different characters actually is there's a lot of characters that are survivors. So, yeah. And I also really liked the way a lot of this material was handled. So like with Inej, on the instances where she's talking about things that she's experienced, there's not like an over explanation of the graphic details. There's no torturous flashback scenes, especially like with the child actor. Which maybe it's redundant for me to even say, oh, you know, thank you for not doing that. But it's like when you actually look at the reality of what Hollywood cranks out. Yeah, I'm very glad that it was handled the way that it was. And then also we have Zhenya, and then we also have Zoya. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about the conversations about kind of addressing that material and what to put in and what not to put in. Oh, sorry, knocking my metal straw. Yeah.
Yeah, I memean, I love the way Lee handles that in the book, where it's like we're dealing with the reality of the trauma, not living in it. And that's not the correct word. We are dealing with the reality of the trauma without like glorifying the act. You know, like we don't need to sit there and fucking watch it go down or like know the gross details of it. Like we know what it is. What we need to understand is the effect that it's had on the character more than the act itself. Because like I don't think if I can work on shows without rape scenes, great. I don't need to see another rape scene, dude. I just don't. I know what's going down. I don't need to do a 10 long or, 10 minute. There are movies where they just like fucking live in the rape scene for minutes on end. And I don't need that in my life, quite frankly. Like I also think the other difficulty there is what ends up happening is if you do that, it is hard to pull away from that. And then it suddenly becomes only about that thing. And so like, I like that. I love the way Lee handles it, where it's like, this is a traumatic event that happened to a character, but it's not the whole of their character. It is, it is something that they are grappling with and they are surviving and they are, dealing with, but we don't need to sit there and like watch it. We just don't.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting because I felt like people really underestimated. I feel bad that I'm only bringing her up now when we don't have like a whole lot of time left. But like with Zoya's material, I really loved her arc, and I loved the way that subject matter was handled because maybe I just have a different understanding of that subject matter. I don't know, maybe just from a combination of different things, from life experience, from just like consumption and analysis of stories for a certain amount of time in a certain type of way of just like not just watching a lot of stuff, but talking about content for a certain number of years, doing interviews for a certain number of years. So just like requires you to analyze the material in a different way. But like, I mean, I even wrote an article. It was published. Hey, you girl got an article. But yeah, I wrote an article about like the four main lead Asian characters in Shadow and Bone. What?
I've read that article.
Ah, thank you. I couldn't remember if you had I feel like I vaguely remember you being like, oh, I'm reading it right now. That's all I remember. But actually, hopefully she doesn't mind me saying this on something I'm about to put on the internet. But I did send the article to Sujaya and she read it. And like, I don't want to, leak every private conversation that I've ever had with her or exchange. It's not really a conversation, but just, the exchanges we've had online privately. But, I mean, she didn't tell me that I was wrong in my analysis of the story. It's, I feel like a lot of people don't always put certain things together, because like when it came to Zoya's story specifically, you know, I'm putting things together based on information that is presented in the show. It's not like I'm just jumping to conclusions for no reason, but you know, it's not something that's as blatantly communicated. You know, I think a lot of people were perceiving that interaction between the two characters of like, oh, they've had a relationship, and I'm like, no, the Darkling has children brought to his palace, and in the books, more or less, all of these characters were children. I've aged them up in my mind for the show just for my own, like, to not be as stressed out watching it. But I'm sure there are probably some people watching it that in their mind, they're like, oh, this character was 17 in the book, so there's 17 in the show, which is fine. You can do that because the show doesn't tell you one way or another. But, you know, like, it's grooming. Like, she was groomed. Like, the whole thing is that you want his approval.
Yes.
And so, you know, I really felt for her that, like, that's why she lashes out all the time. And that's what I said in my article of, like, she wants his validation because he's very and he's charismatic. We know this. We've talked about this. But he's, like, she wants his validation. So, like, that's why she lashes out in certain situations, because she can sense his attention and his approval slipping away, and he's more focused on Alina now. Like, that's what the issue is. So, yeah.
I mean, age aside, because he's, you know, hundreds of years old. So, like, in the books, he looks like a 19, 20-year-old because it's a YA book. They're all a certain age. I mean, quite frankly, on the show, I have a hard time looking at them as anything under 20 because it's just that I've seen their faces and they are actors that are a certain age. Archie has a child. And I'm just like, he's like an adult.
Shout out to Archie's child.
Yeah,
that was unnecessary, but I'm putting it in anyway. I'm leaving it in.
So, like, all of the age stuff taken aside, the guy is in an incredible position of power. Like, it's hard for me not to interpret his relationship with Zoya as a grooming situation, because here's the other thing. If you've read the books, like, once you get into King of Scars and Rule of Wolves, like, her perception of the Darkling comes from somebody who realizes, I was groomed when I was younger by this person. And I was, like, that I was manipulated, and, like, fuck him. So, like, I just, personally, I love Zoya as a character. I think that she has an incredible arc over the span of, like, 5 books, more if you include the Crow's duology. Oh, they're all amazing. But, like, Zoya starts in a very specific place and ends in a completely different place. You know what I mean? Like, she learns. Here's another thing that like breaks my heart about Zoya is there's this perception of her that she needs to be a perfect person. And it's just like, the reality of Zoya is that she was raised as a Grisha. Her background, which, you know, we don't get into in the show, but if you've read the books, you understand, is that she did not have an easy upbringing, and she had to be a hard ass bitch in order to get forward, like, to get through in life and to do well for herself. You know, she is a young person who has had to fight her way to get what she gets. And, like, she is who she is because she's had no other choice. So me personally, I'm just like, I think it's unfair that there's this weird perception that we have of women that we have to be perfect. Like, I love Alina. Part of the reason that she's so easy to root for is because everybody is being an asshole to her. The way society treats female characters who are not Alina and not being, like, perfect and put upon, and, like, we treat them terribly. Quite frankly, we don't like it when characters like Zoya act the way that they act, because you are not, as a woman, allowed to be anything but perfect and understanding and nurturing and, like, the underdog. You cannot be somebody who is in a position of power. You cannot be a person who makes difficult decisions. And you cannot be a person who is, quite frankly, not necessarily nice to everybody. Those characters, like, get hated on a regular basis. And it breaks my heart to see that, because it's just like, why is it that the Darkling can be the Darkling and he's got this huge fan base, and Zoya says and does some shitty stuff and, like, she gets crapped on? Like, it breaks my heart. And she was
so much worse in the books. Like, I had no idea reading the first book that she was such a fan favorite, because I hadn't read any of the other books. I only read the first one. And I was going, oh my God, this is, I'm pretty sure I said in my article that in the first book, she's not so much a character as she is a caricature, you know, like any mean girl trope that you've ever seen in any sleepover movie. That's Zoya in the first book specifically. So, you know.
I mean,
I think you guys made her an actual human being, or a whatever. Like,
yes,
you made her a three-dimensional character and not just a caricature like she was in the first book. Like, all tea, no shade, no pink lemonade, whatever.
Dude, the function of Zoya in the first book is that she's an antagonist to Alina. The entire point of her is to make Alina's life harder. And what we did was we wanted to start her from a place where she is, you know, bristly and prickly and not super sweet. And she is different from Alina, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then, like, you know, the hope is, you know, you get 1,000 seasons and you do an arc for her. And, like, it's really difficult for me at times because, like, the criticisms that women get, female characters in particular, in comparison to male characters is just, like, infuriating at times. Like, I worked on The Magicians for 3 seasons, and, like, people loved Alice until they didn't love Alice, and she was making mistakes and doing things that they didn't think was okay. And, like, she was, like, and she went through some really traumatic shit, and, like, she was trying to figure out who she was. And the reality is, like, none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all, like, are products of, like, the environments that we are in, and we are all just trying to survive. And women and female characters in particular are just not allowed to struggle. They're just not. And so, yeah, it breaks my heart because I love Zoya. I love Zoya so much. But I also think that, like, the arc that she has in the novels is fantastic. And I think it would be a disservice for us to, like, write her as somebody who is simple and easy and pleasant. Like, she's just not that person. So yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting because, like, this whole issue of these characters being survivors and the whole topic of consent, I think that fundamentally the Darkling does not understand consent, and I think that's very clearly conveyed because then in the season finale, no one's watching this that hasn't seen the show. You know, where Alina says, I wrote down the quote, it says, "You cannot claim what was not given to you. The stag chose me." And I remembered that I had written that line down, so I had to pull it out and, you know, put it in my notes for this interview, where I'm just going, yeah, see, because that's a recurring thing with his character. And it's been stated multiple times where his own mother says, you know, he's had centuries to master manipulating naive young girls. And then you see this relationship, this encounter, as it were, with Zoya in his room. And Alina also says that to him. And it's like, it's so, like, I don't understand how, like, what more does the writing room have to do for you people to get it? Because I'm like, this has been very clearly communicated, you know, that this is an integral part of why he does the things that he does and why he is ultimately the villain in this story. Make me your villain. No, you are the villain. Bye. You know,
I have to say, this is one of the, like, my favorite things about being a writer is this is the majority of the time, you know, when you're in a writer's room, all you're doing is sitting there and essentially psychoanalyzing characters and asking why they do what they do and how they tick and what is their damage that produces, like, the version of them that we're seeing on screen. And it's just like the Darkling. Like, look, as a viewer, he's not my favorite type of character. I'll just say that. Just because, like, I am very much, like, you know, Jesper, Mal, Kaz, like, all of these characters are, like, I dated the Darkling, so I'm just like, oh, that guy, I know you. But psychoanalyzing his character is just, like, fascinating. And it is so, it's not that it's enjoyable. It's just interesting to understand why that guy ticks the way he ticks. And you're 1,000% correct. Like, he's been around for so long that his perception of consent is completely skewed, because it's also just like his perception of what people need is also different. You know, all of these people are so much younger than him. His perspective of the world is so much different. And I just feel like the older some people get, the more they feel like, I know what's up. It's like, it's so funny because, like, I think that, like, there's a period in your 20s where you're just like, I know what's up. I'm an adult now. And then, like, the older you get, you're just like, I've been through so much shit. I know what's up.
And you're just like, I did not know what I was talking about.
Dude, it's hilarious because, like, I'm sitting here in my 40s and I'm just like, Jesus Christ. There is so much out there that I just don't understand. But I also, like, completely feel like, you know, the more experience that I have, I do have more perspective. So I do think the Darkling is just like, look, I'm like 1,000 years old. I got all the perspective. You got none. I don't care. What does your consent mean in the scope of things? You know, it's like that Dr. Manhattan thing where it's like, they're all ants. They're all puny, tiny little ants. So yeah, it's fascinating, his character. I love being a writer. Just sitting there and talking about why people do what they do in terms of these stories is just the best part.
So you wrote episode 7. I'm trying to rush through like the last few things of like, at any point cut me off.
Don't worry about it. Go. Let's just keep going.
So with I don't think this is from episode 7, but you wrote episode 7. Yeah. I was just looking for a really good photo of Kaz and Inej together. Oh, we all ship it because we all have taste. But there's this line that you wrote, "No saint ever watched over me, not like you have." And I was going, ooh, that's fire. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to bring that up. Let's talk about Kaz and Inej because the people love it. We love it. They served us this quality, chemistry with the two of them together. Oh, so good. So, that whole conversation was so good. It was such a great moment between them. I feel like we might have talked about it last time, but I want to, go deeper and just like really give you the space to just fully flesh out, bringing that moment to life because it's one of the most iconic encounters they have all season. So
thank you. So that scene is near and dear to my heart for multiple reasons. I'll just say I was like a total asshole in the room. I say that, it's an exaggeration. I was not an asshole. But that scene in particular, we were discussing what the function of that scene was and like what it is that Kaz wanted versus what it is Inej wanted. And like the thing that I was stuck on for the longest time was I was just like, he can't just ask her to do a thing and she'll agree to do it. He has to give her something. And by give her, I don't mean a transactional sort of a thing. I mean an emotional, like revealing of how he feels. Like he needs to say something to her that will make her understand how he's feeling in this moment. And why, like he's done the things that he's done before. And like, so we were going back and forth in the room and I was being very like, you can't just convince somebody. Like it's gotta be like an emotional bearing of his heart. And so like, I can't remember exactly how it down, but there was a certain point in which we started talking about Inej's religion and how she had all this faith and he didn't have any faith. And it's just like, to get to her, what do you need to do? And I'll toot my own horn. For me, it was that. It was the very much like that line, the whole like, no saints ever watched over me the way you just have essentially. Like, to me, that was the moment. Like, I was like, he needs to say this in order for her to understand and trust him, like, and know what she means to him. Because he would never outright say it, but that's as close as it's going to be. So it's hilarious because like there was like just back and forth in the room where I was just being adamant like, no, I'm looking for a thing and we haven't found it yet. Keep talking at me. Like keep talking to me until we find the thing. And then that line was the thing that cinched it for me. That was genuinely the thing that like made me understand what that scene needed to be. Because the other thing that I wanted specifically from that scene was to pull the crows moment from Crooked Kingdom where he was expressing to her what crows meant. And so like I had personal goals for that scene. And it's so funny because then when I wrote the first draft of that episode, everybody was like, fuck, that scene is good. And I was like, thank you. And as we were doing rewrites and stuff, there were moments where I wanted to make adjustments to that scene and change certain things. And they were like, don't you dare touch it. Don't change it. Leave it alone. Don't touch that scene. And so like, it was funny because like I love that scene and apparently I was also like the least protective of it, where I was just like, well, we can change this one thing. And they were like, shut up. No, don't touch it. And I was like, okay, cool. But yeah,
good.
Right? Like for me, I think we've talked about this a little bit. I'm a very sensory sort of writer. My process, and now that I know I have ADHD, which was like a discovery for me this year, it kind of all clicks because like the thing that I've always said in every room that I'm in is like my entire goal as a writer is to like fuck people in the heart. It's like, can I fuck myself in the heart? Can I feel the thing that I'm trying to—
Too many Korean dramas you've been watching.
Dramas. But like, so I'm a sensory person where it's just like, if I am writing, there is an emotion that I am seeking out. And until I find that emotion, it is not correct. So that, the fact that that scene like was the scene that was like a linchpin for me and understanding the entirety of the Crow's arc that episode is just like, that's what it was. Like, I was like, I have to feel the thing. And for Kaz and Inej, because they cannot touch, it has to be either through action or words. So like I love them dearly because they feel like a varsity level like couple to write, where it's like they are extra hard. Also, my personal thing, I am so into couples that can't touch, like Rogue and Gambit, or like I feel like they informed my entire idea of what romances should be. Like I love X-Men and Rogue and Gambit. Like the fact that they can't touch is, I'm just like so Kaz and Inej are great.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think one time I had asked viewers when more Shadow and Bone people were watching me, because it was in the lead up to the show, so I was cranking out videos because I was like, I need people to watch this show because I want it renewed. So, but I had kind of put the question out there where I was sort of asking people because I was genuinely curious. I was like, do you want them to touch on the show? And if so, like at what point? And a lot of people were very like, no, don't touch ever, or like very, very slowly inch up to like a little bit of physical, and I was kind of surprised because maybe just my AO3 history is so like explicit that I was just assuming that more people would be like, well, you can put your foot on the gas a little bit more than how it was in the books. But no, people really, they're here for the slow burn. And I was like, well, I mean, you say that, but have you ever had the slow burn couple and then it gets canceled because television, the industry is fickle, and then you never get the payoff that you thought you were going to get at the end of the, like, because you never got to the finish line. So maybe that's also why. You know what it is? I'm still traumatized from The Punisher being canceled and the fact that Frank Castle and Karen Page never kissed on screen. Let me tell you, if I ever interview Ben, I'm going to be such a menace because I'm just going to keep talking about The Punisher and he's going to hate me. But you know what? Like,
he's going to love it.
It's just the way things go.
I mean, I got two modes. I got bone first, feel later, and never touch. Like those are my two things. Where I'm just like, I'm either just like, can it be sexier, or can we drag it out as long as humanly possible? And I love Kaz and Inej for that, where it's just like, just torturous. And this is very much the Korean in me, where I'm just like, how long can we go before they get the smallest of Darcy style hand touch? Like how far can we take it before this right here, this tiny bit of skin is just like the hottest thing you've ever seen?
Oh my God, that reminds me, like when The Mandalorian first came out and I had not watched the show. I still only seen one season, but there was a screenshot floating around from the show and people were talking about like, oh, I feel like I'm being like from the Victorian era by bringing this up. The fact that I'm freaking out that in this one scene you can see like this much of Pedro. Well, I don't even think he was filming for a season, but the character, you can see like this much of his wrist peeking out. Yes. Because the whole thing is he doesn't show himself to anyone. Yes. And so I was just laughing so much of like, oh my, how scandalous, a little flash of wrist. Like
the idea, like the hottest thing Kaz could ever do is like slowly remove his glove, where it's just like, I see the veins on the top of his hand. Oh my God. That's like nudity right there. Like, yeah. Oh my God. I love a slow burn, but I definitely like, you're right. Because the whole mentality in television is like, you don't know if you're going to get another season. The guarantee of another season is just not there. But I feel like with Kaz and Inej, they are so fundamentally like that slow burn. Like if you were to find any couple on the show as a slow burn, the first couple you're going to think of is Kaz and Inej. And I say the show in the books. If you were to think about slow burns, they are the epitome of that. So there was, it wouldn't have made sense to the room for us to do the version where like at the end of the season, she like pulls off his glove and touches his hand and then they like make out. Because they were just like, who are these characters?
Yeah, I feel like if Freddy was really bored and he just wanted to terrorize the internet, because I'm pretty sure he stole a pair of gloves from set. I could be misremembering. I know he stole something, but I don't remember. If he would just like post an Instagram video of himself just like with the gloves on and just very slowly just like remove one, just with no context, no caption.
It's the grab the tip of the finger thing where he like slowly pulls it off.
I would love it if he did that, just because I would be looking at the comments. I'd be like, I want to see the mayhem. See, I like to spectate, I would just want to witness the mess of just people being like, why would you do this? And he would be like, why not? I should interview him and just be like, I'm bored. Like, put some chaos onto the internet. Like, just pick a random Tuesday and just.
See, now I regret not writing it into season 2. just like specifically type out like, and then he slowly removes.
But a director could put it in somehow, just like an unnecessary close-up, just like a really unnecessarily long. You got to coordinate with the director and with the editor, just like an unnecessarily long, lingering of just like a hand in or out of glove shot.
It's true. We haven't shot it yet, so there's still time. There's still time.
There's room. There's room to fit it in there. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was I knew that you had taken this approach even before I had seen the show.
Yeah.
Where you, when in going into writing your episode, which was episode 7, that you were really trying to pull book quotes, and I feel like you got a lot of the. I mean, I'm not an expert on the books. I haven't read them a million times, but I think you had Make Me Your Villain. I think you might have also had No Mourners, No Funerals. Yeah, so did you like call dibs or something? Like, what was that you got like the 2 quotes that everyone was like, I need to hear this quote, and you got both of them?
So it's hilarious because Make Me Your Villain was just naturally going to be in my episode because what that episode was. And the crow's speech was something I chose. I specifically was just like, I don't care that this happens in Crooked Kingdom. I'm putting it in my episode. The No Mourners, No Funeral is hilarious to me because I wrote the first draft of the script and it wasn't in there. And I'm looking back at all of the other scripts because somebody had said that they were going to try to get it in because we were like, this is basically going to be the origin of No Mourners, No Funerals. And I'm like reading all the other scripts and I'm like, nobody ever says it. I was like, nobody ever says it, guys. And they were like, well, it doesn't fit anywhere. And I was like, I will make it fit. So I spent forever.
That's what Kaz said when he put his glove on. Sorry. Continue. My terrible sense of humor just reared its ugly head. Carry on.
So I just sat there one day and I spent entirely too much time because I was like, it's going to happen at the end of the episode. And I don't want just one person, because I remember talking to Dagan and it's just like, it needs to be a call and response. But if we can get all 3 of them to say it, that'd be even more choice so that it feels like an origin of it. And so it was just like, how do I break it up so that all of them get a little piece of it? And then on top of that, I was like, how do I naturally get them to talk about this? So I spent probably 3 hours on this little section here because I genuinely was like Rolodexing through my mind about what kind of conversations would lead to it. And then I will never get this. So the thing with Jesper saying, like, you know, if I get buried, have an open casket, people deserve to see this pretty face. That is also from the books. So like, as I was like trying to figure out what to do, I was just like looking through this like list of good quotes that I had, and I saw that, and I was like, this is a 2-hit punch. I get to use more quotes from the book, and I get to use No Mourners, No Funerals, and I get to be a hero because people will be mad if they don't hear it. So like, so yeah, that was me. I am a huge fan of like hardcore fan Easter eggs. Like I tend to look at the source material that I'm working on and look for small snippets. Like there are so many lines in episodes that I've written that are straight up from the book, and they might not be the most memorable lines, but like if somebody rereads or they're like aware of things, there are several times where I just use lines Lee's written, or I modify a line Lee's written just to kind of get it in there, because I am the kind of fan who, when I find stuff like that, I like lose my shit. So I'm always just like, I'm just going to feed you guys. I'm just going to feed you all the material. Here it is. So.
Well, again, I'm showing my bias by like bringing up my boy David again, but I have to do it since we're talking about your episode, because there's this moment where he's going to put the collar on Alina because he's the one with the power to do that, or at least try to do that. It's not like it's something he's ever done before. But the line where he says, you should have access to all of her light in theory. And it's like, it's a combination of the fact that it's a really good line, but it's also the way Luke delivers it, because he's a genius. Luke, I love you. He's so good. Like, honestly, the amount of emotional terrorizing this man has done to my life, just he constantly gets into shows or movies and he dies. And I'm like, why? Why does the industry hate him? Or maybe they hate me by constantly terrorizing Luke. I don't know. But it's such a good line, and it's such a good delivery of it, because it's like the implication of it being that in this, because he's such a thinker, he's such an analytical person, and in this moment, you know, it's not just an idea anymore, it's not just a theory, it's real, and the consequences are real, and he's having to like face that head on, because he's not super great with people, you know, he's very much about objects and ideas and theories. He's very much like an academic, but now he actually has to face it head on. Oh, it's so underrated, and I wanted to shine a light on it, no pun intended, because it's so good. And also, like, I need to remind everyone, I need to remind the universe that David is great and we need more David. Okay. So
I want to give so much of the credit in that moment to Luke, quite frankly, because it was a hard scene to write, because he does it in the books. Like, he's the guy who kind of like collars her, and he doesn't it doesn't go into her body, but he seals it around her. And so like he did a really good job performance-wise with delivering that. And it's so interesting because that line is so expositional, where it's just like, this should give you access to her light in theory, where it's just like his character is a little rambly because he's talking about it, and he's like, this is like, he's being too honest about the fact that it is a theory, but it's also the thing that he's doing. And I think the reason that line stands out more than it you know does in the script, because in the script it's just exposition, is his performance. Like, he does a really good job with that character, and like I love him so much. Like, I just love him as an actor, and I love the way he did David. Like, I think he did his tape for David was so cute. Like, he's just great. But also that moment, he did just a really nice job with it, you know? Like, it's a thing that, like, I don't think this is a spoiler, he's going to have to grapple with in season 2. Because, like, clearly, you know, in the moment when he's doing it, he's not feeling good about it. So, like, yeah, it's, I'm going to give all those kudos to Luke.
Yeah. When he had that one scene, it's not in your episode, that one scene where he goes like this.
Yes!
I was like, where is his Emmy? Where is his Emmy? Where is his Golden Globe? I was so like, how? He had barely any lines in this season, Christina, and that was his moment. He stole it. Ben Barnes is in that scene. I don't even care. I don't care. All I care about is
Luke
so
is
good. Well, I mean, to be fair, it's a call and response moment where when Ben's just like, you don't have to, you know, he has to play the straight man in the moment, because with a lot of great comedy, it's very, you know, Groucho Marx. And oh my God, I'm so bad. My film trivia brain is fried right now because I was researching a bunch of other stuff and I can't remember her name. But Groucho Marx had this actress who very famously, she was basically like the fourth Marx brother with that trio, where she always had to play the straight man opposite Groucho Marx, you know, kind of the foil. And in that moment, I was like, that's like classic comedic dynamic of, you know, the little, and then you don't have to. Okay.
Yeah, Ben is so good when he's playing against comedy. Like, he's very good at that. So like Luke is just so delightful, because on the Alina side of things, there's not a ton of comedic characters. You know, a lot of them tend to be side kind of tertiary characters, and David is just so light and fluffy. Like, he does such a good job of bringing just dynamic moments. But at the same time, he's an incredible actor, so he can also like ground it and bring it to the scene where he like collars her, you know, like he can do that and also just be empathetic. And you know, Kit is also good at that. Kit is also so fucking good at doing the same sort of thing, where it's just like Jesper is light and fluffy, but then like when he's in my episode, when he's talking to Inej about her, you know, like knowing that she's probably gonna leave, like Kit's also just a fucking good emotional actor. He's dynamic like that. So our cast is so good.
Yeah, well, and they had a great moment together, David and Jesper.
Yeah.
When, you know, he just throws, and he's like, he threw a book at me, and I was like, ah!
It's so good.
It's so good. Like, oh, poor Dave. Like, you know, I'm sure in that moment, a lot of people are happy, because a lot of the fans, what I've observed online anyway, of the fan chatter, they really like when Kaz does violence, And 99% of the time I agree, where I'm like, yes, Kaz is doing the Kaz thing. He's going to wreak some havoc. He's going to, inflict some violence. But when it was on David, I was like, oh no, Kaz, see, now we're in a fight because you came for my boy and he was minding his own business. He wasn't even like, anyway, I just feel like, David did not get enough screen time. So that's why I'm so aggressively like I'm putting it out into the universe so that everyone will remember like, oh yeah, David, he is the moment.
Again, good news. We really like him. I'm not going to say anything other than we really like him. So,
well, I hope Luke feels like he's getting his moment in the spotlight, because I know that only just recently they did, I think Netflix put together a duo interview with Daisy and Sujaya, which was nice because they hadn't really been as prominently featured, understandably so, because it's like, you kind of go down the roster of the call sheet or whatever, but they still have not gone Luke, and I'm like, I can't stand the lot of you for leaving. What is he doing? Every time I go on Instagram and look at his story, he's like making pasta or like hanging out with his friends. He has the time. Get him on the laptop.
It's tricky. So like, it's weird. It feels weird saying this. In Netflix's defense, it's a huge cast. Like, it is not the only, like, the bananas thing, because it's 2 books combined and there were a lot of characters in each one to begin with. It is like such a huge roster. It's so crazy because like if you just think about the like headlining crows and the headlining like Shadow and Bone characters, is 3 on Shadow and Bone side, and then like right now we've got 5 of the 6 of crows. So that's like 8 characters already. It's wild. And then if you count Zoya, that's not like, it just like and then you count Jenya and it just keeps getting, that's 10 right there. So yeah, it's a huge cast. It's really hard, but we love them all. We love them all.
I just feel like if I aggressively say certain things loud enough, then I'll get my way, and or someone will come and be on my channel. Eric, where are you? Anyway. I shouldn't yell at him. I don't think he would like being. I'm not trying. I'm so sorry. I'm being aggressive. I'm just trying to manifest. Like it's nothing personal.
He is a delightfully gentle person.
Another thing I had to ask about was, this isn't in your episode, but it is, obviously something that you would have been involved in, because all the writers, you throw your ideas around at each other and you come to agreements about stuff. But one of the things that I really was impressed by was in the very last episode where they had this revelation of Alina gives Inej a knife, and then Inej, it's not super explicitly said, but it's basically heavily implied that she's going to name the knife after Alina, which I was like, oh, that's so good. Because if you've read the books and you read the Six of Crows duology from the beginning of the, I don't know how many knives that Inej has, one of them is named after Alina. So, I need to know the journey to get to that. Or maybe it was a very quick, like, oh, somebody just said, let's do that. And then you go, yeah. And then it's call it a day. But
it was a quick, okay, if I am incorrect on this, I apologize to the writers in the room. From my memory, it was a pretty quick decision that was made on Eric's part. Eric was like, and so she gets the letter opener from Alina, and she names it Sancta Alina. That's how she got that Sancta Alina dagger. So if I remember correctly, Eric knew from very early on that was going to be a thing that he wanted to do.
His mind is so powerful.
Dude, it is such a good room, because I think that like one of the things that's really lovely is everybody in the room loves the books. We all love the books, and we all have different things from the book that we want to pull in, where it's like all of us have our emotional attachments. So it's like everybody's just like, but what if we do this? And what if we do this? So there's a bunch of stuff that gets pulled from the original source material because we all just love it so much. So yeah, Eric, I'm pretty sure Eric was the one who came up with the dagger. So yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep you for too long, but I feel like I do need to re-emphasize this, even though I'm 98% sure that I've already talked about this, but I need to manifest it by just saying it out loud again. and this isn't like super your department, but since you are going to be on set and producing, so I mean, like, I know directing is not your thing, but you're around. So I really need to emphasize the importance of showcasing height difference, because like when they hugged and her head's like here and his head's up here, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm already emotional enough. You just made it worse. And then also, I don't know if they were putting Amita on a box in certain shots, but like I've seen real life pictures of these two together. I'm like, no, height difference. Like, because I feel like once I became aware that they had a height difference, and then I was looking through some of the clips of the two of them when they have their scenes together, and it's always shot in kind of a way of, it's very like, this is a very modern thing of, oh, I'm going to show this person and then I'm going to show this person and whatever. I'm like, no, put them in the same shot, in the same frame. I need to see the height difference because aesthetically it's pleasing and film is a visual medium. So like height difference, this isn't what makes or breaks the show being successful or like considered to be quality. I'm just saying that the devil is in the details and height difference. So
all I'm going to say is in episode 107, when they are all lying down on their tummies under that cart, you can tell she's tiny.
I live for this because I feel like I didn't realize that Freddy was that tall. But then Jessie's dad, Art, who's very active on Twitter, very hilarious. That man has no business being that funny, and he's not even in show business. How? Oh, he wants a cameo, by the way.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, he might have been like joking or half joking, but I'm not joking. So like give him a cameo because I want it to be like, where's Wally or where's Waldo? And then we can all be looking for him. Like, where is he in the season? Yeah, give him a cameo. I mean, he'll probably visit Jessie on set anyway. So you might as well just put him in an outfit and, put him in the back somewhere. Yeah, just, I don't know if you saw that. He might have deleted this because sometimes he deletes his tweets, but I don't know if you saw this exchange that he and I had one time where he was saying that he wanted to play Alina's mother. And I was, and at first, like, I didn't understand what he was saying because I thought he just meant like, oh, well, he would have loved to have played her parent because he actually is Jessie's father. Yeah. But then he was like, no, I want to play the mother. Like, I want a wig and blah, blah, blah. And like, it just escalated. It was just tweet after tweet after tweet. I was like, I want to live inside this man's mind for a day just because I feel like I'll learn something, or at the very least, I will learn how to be funny because it was very chaotic. But yeah, he wants a cameo. So if you need like I don't even know what, because I don't know what you're doing for season 2, but just put him in the back somewhere, or just, like while you're like somebody's walking through a village or a new location, and then the camera's following the people walking and he's just there, and it's like blink and you'll miss it. But for those of us who know, will know.
I have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts. This is good to know.
Yeah. I feel bad that that's not even really a question. It's just me ranting about like how aesthetically pleasing height difference couples are, because Hollywood always lies and they always change like what people's heights actually are. And I'm like, why can't we showcase? I mean, apparently it's such a struggle to get Hollywood to be inclusive for people of different ethnicities and gender identities and all of those other things that are very serious. But we can't even get like the very trivial representation of height differences. Really? Like real life, everyone is not the same height, Hollywood.
I know. Yeah, I don't know what they did. I don't know if like in the coverage if it's coverage and nobody's in it, they didn't put her on an Apple box, but I don't know if they did that when they were like in group shots. I don't know. I wasn't there. But if I'm lucky enough to produce in season 2, I mean, let's see how it all pans out, because these are all future things. Fingers crossed.
Also, I just really love the idea of like, again, I don't know, like for the record, for anyone who's wondering, she has not told me like, here's beat by beat, here's the plot for season 2. I don't know. I'm just speaking in a general sense based off of having seen the first season and having read, certain books that are presumably going to be drawn on for inspiration. If at any point there's a conflict happening where Inej is going to use her knife skills and Kaz has certain limitations, like he can't just take off charging after someone because obviously he has a certain disability and he walks with a cane. So he's not just going to... So I love I just mentally, like, maybe this is my, like, maybe I'll be a director someday, like, brain side of my brain working, where I'm just imagining her, like, getting in front of him, like, with her knives, like, I'm gonna like start taking these people out, and just her being like this, and then he's like standing behind her. I love that, you know, just like, I don't know, you don't have to play something like that off for comedy. It depends on the context of what's happening in the scene and what the stakes are. But like, it's aesthetically pleasing to me, of just like this tiny, you know, this tiny like woman with her knives, like, and she's deadly. Like, I want to make that clear. I'm not making light of her skills at all, but just, you know, I'm envisioning her just being a little tiny, you know, standing in front of you.
It's so cute, but also awesome. Like, she is, I don't know. I just want to say real quick, the lady has been like good about not asking me for spoilers, and I have not told her so. So she is not lying when she says when you say you don't know something, you're not lying. I have not told you anything. I've been very good. So nobody on there who watches this interview give her any crap, because she doesn't know shit. Like, I've been very good about keeping things secret. So yeah,
because even going into season 1, we were already talking, but you didn't really give me like, and here's the, like, I didn't know about Milo before I saw the show, which that's probably one of the bigger spoilers, but it was more just like, I think I remember you said, oh, I was looking to the books more to pull quotes. Yeah. Like, I remember you telling me that, but even that's not specific, you know? So it wasn't like you spoiled everything. I just remember you were saying, like, because I told you as soon as I got the screeners, I was like, oh my God, I got the screeners. Yes. And then you were saying, you have to, like, I'm going to bed right now, but you have to message me, like, your play-by-play commentary reaction. And that was it. Like, yes. Which is not spoilers at all.
I wanted to hear your thoughts immediately, because I was just like, I'm dying. I haven't told her anything, and I just want to know what she thinks of the freaking show. Like, so yeah, that was good. It was delightful to hear. And this is so bad with my friends, but the joke with my friends is that I am a spoiler alert. Where it's just like, we'll talk about Vincenzo, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just like, I'm so proud I kept secrets.
Yeah, I think you told me when I was going to start watching Vincenzo, I think you were warning me, like, just so you know, on Korean shows, like, they always kill off they make you fall in love with characters and then they kill them off. And I think, I'm trying to remember the exact timeline of when you told me that, but I think you had told me that either right when I had already figured out that one of the characters was going to get killed off, or I had just seen the character get killed off, and I so badly wanted to message you and being like, yeah, I figured that out now, thank you, but I couldn't because you hadn't gotten to that part in the show yet. So I was like, I kept, like, anytime you would tell me stuff, I was like, I'm not going to respond to that because I've seen more than you have. So, like, I'm just going to...
I'm pretty sure I warned you before, but I didn't know, because I was only a handful of episodes in. I think I warned you that because there were so many characters in the show, and I was just like, this is a mafia show. Not everybody's going to live. So I should warn her, just in case she falls in love with anybody, so she can, like, protect herself. And there we were, dying.
Well, and speaking of directing, just to make sure that we do end on something related to Shadow and Bone, I feel like if I was a director that was kind of on the circuit of getting hired for directing TV episodes or whatever, I feel like it would be a really fun episode to do the reveal, if he's in the show, of Nikolai. Like, if you're the person who gets to kind of visually build up to the reveal of, you know, because you have the kind of two-pronged thing of, there's people who are just watching the show because they're watching a big Netflix show that don't know the source material. But then you have the other part of the audience that does know the source material, and they know that this is a very big, iconic character that everyone has been building up to. We want to see this character on the show, and we want to see who's going to play them. We want to see how they're going to play them. So I feel like, putting together the visual the visual storytelling, the language of kind of, depending on what's in the script, obviously, but just kind of, you know, like, oh, a flash of a garment or like a shoe or just hearing some, or, you know, seeing something in the distance or whatever. I feel like you could play around with that so much. And that, if he's in season 2, I would hope that, you know, it's not, I mean, if it is, you know, I know that if there's not a lot of time, there's not a lot of time. But if you have time to play like that visually, oh my God, it would be so much fun to just kind of build up to that. It's just like, that's the thing is, because I feel like, you know, I think the art of directing has advanced so much, partially because of technology, partially just because, you know, an art form is going to evolve over time and it's going to advance in certain ways. Because it was interesting, because I was watching Some Like It Hot recently, which I used to watch all the time when I was little, and I rewatched it. And first of all, it's hilarious still to this day, but I was very surprised kind of watching it, where I didn't remember, because I didn't think about these things as much when I was watching it as a kid, but there's so many just long takes of the camera just sitting there. But like, I mean, it still works because, you know, Billy Wilder was a genius, like as a director and as a scriptwriter. So, and you have such strong performers, and Jack Lemmon is a comedic genius. But it was just so interesting because it's like, you know, the whole style of directing has advanced in a very different way. So, you know, with something like doing the reveal of Nikolai, you would probably have like, cut to this object, cut to this thing, cut to this, you know, and you could have that kind of kinetic energy in it, very like Guy Ritchie. I always reference Guy Ritchie because I love him. He deleted his Twitter. I don't know why, and I'm upset because I didn't get a warning. Just one day I woke up and he wasn't there anymore. I don't know what happened. Why? Like, oh God, what if he did something bad? What if he's canceled and I have to? I put that bad energy into that. It would be interesting to see, like, if that character is there, you know. I love those little moments of, I remember when they did one of the earlier scenes of the crows in, I don't remember if it was in episode 1, it might have been, but there was a very clear shift in style when you were going from the Shadow and Bone world to the Six of Crows world, where you had these like quick cuts and it was very like flashing from zoom to zoom to zoom. And I was like, this is very Guy Ritchie. I mean, not that Guy Ritchie is the only person who puts stuff together like that, but he's the one that I watch the most and rewatch the most. And it's very, you know, like I love stuff like that. I mean, it's not always appropriate to a scene, but when you can do stuff like that, I just feel like it adds pizzazz. Like that's the fun of having it on live action, you know, and to not have it just be pages on a script or pages in a book, because that's a different art form. I don't want it to sound like I'm bashing books or bashing the written word, but you know.
Oh yeah, no, the directing on the show is wild. And like, I think that I personally as a writer try to do as little directing as possible in my scripts, just because I don't want to step on directors' toes and I don't want to tell them how to feel. Sometimes I'll put some stuff in there that is it's like on so-and-so. And part of the reason that I do that isn't necessarily that I want them to shoot the exact thing that I wrote so much as it's like, this is an important thing. Make sure you get, you know, a tight of this, or you get in on this and we see this so that it's important, so that it's understood that it's important. So like, yeah, I mean, with Shadow and Bone, so much of the directorial choices were like Lee, Tolan Krieger for the, you know, the first 2 episodes, and then like all the other directors for the rest of the episodes. And it's just like, they all did such a good job. They did an incredible job, man. We got really lucky with everybody involved. And I feel bad because like, I feel like I've been not saying everybody's names and I just stopped tired.
But you have the leeway because you weren't a producer on set. So, you know, come episode 2, you'll have more of the day-to-day, like seeing what director is working on that episode or whatever.
Well, that's the thing, right? Where it's just like, I've produced before. It's just when you're not on set, sometimes you don't understand like what's going down with certain things and you're just not there, and like you don't think to ask about things. It's just like, I'm like, oh, there's so many people involved behind the scenes that I would love to shout out, but it's like between not having met them or knowing their names, like it's just, yeah, there's a all I know is everything that I've heard is like everybody was lovely to work with. There were a ton of people who pulled heroic feats of incredible, you know, talent and strength behind the scenes, and like I hope I get to meet them.
I just thought of one last question that is like a little closer, because I remember somebody had asked me this very early on in me posting about Shadow and Bone and whatnot, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll ask Christina that at some point, and I've just never remembered to ask you. Is they were asking about the choice to, with it being fantasy, why is it predominantly British, like British actors speaking what we would consider British English? Because there's a couple, you know, people that you know, Julian, he's kind of referencing more of like an Eastern European. I mean, he is Eastern European, so he's drawing more on that. And then obviously Matthias, he's meant to be Scandinavian, so the aim with that is, but for the most part, most of the people, it's kind of like the actors themselves are mostly British, and they're just doing like a generally British accent.
It's interesting. I think some of that just comes out of the casting, where it's just like you want a relative consistency in some of the casting accents, where it's just like, you know, we had a feeling we were going to be casting primarily British, and then it just kind of played out that way. And then on top of that, the other thing is, like, I think people will notice that, like, technically the crows should not be speaking the same language as the Robkins, because it's two different languages that they speak. But we just have them speaking British, because it would have felt weird to have them speaking actual different languages and then doing accents for them. So it's like, if it's not, it was a discussion of like, what do we want to do? Do we want people to play with a Russian accent, or do we just want them to be their British selves, since we're probably mostly casting, because we're shooting in Europe, so we're probably mostly casting British actors, because it's going to be English language, so that's where most of them are going to come from. So it was just like, it was kind of like, for the majority of them, they brought their real human accents, for not all of them, but most of them. And then it was also just a sort of like, we're not going to play this in Russian. You know, we're not going to make a Robkin language. We're not going to make a Kirch language. We're not going to have everybody speaking in their individual languages. We're just going to do English and just kind of roll with it, and then have moments where you hear other languages. But like, yeah, it was just, I think it's partially a production thing, and part of it is a sense thing. It might have felt a little weird to have all these actors put on fake accents, because it feels awkward. So yeah, that's kind of what it came down to.
Have you seen Warcraft?
I have not.
Okay, well, there's a really good scene in there that I think would be interesting for you to go watch and just have that like in your mental bank of what is possible, where they have this scene where you have the two sides meeting, and they're having like a meeting of, can we try to come to an understanding, or are we going to carry on, you know, being at war or whatever, where the scene starts off like you're in one perspective, but then the camera kind of moves forward, and mid conversation back and forth, the language switches. So like, normally when you hear both sides just existing in their own spaces, you hear them speaking English because it's a big Hollywood blockbuster, but it still conveys that in that moment where they're meeting and occupying the same space, that they're not speaking the same language, and that there's one character who's translating, but then the camera does that visual shift. And it was one of the coolest things I've seen, because I've never seen someone that I can recall. I mean, I probably haven't seen enough films, but it was one of the only times I can recall something being done like that. I made a video essay about Warcraft a few years ago, and it was one of the earliest video essays that I attempted. And Duncan watched it. I know you're cool with him, so if you would like to put in a word, and like if he has free time to come on, because he's a genius and he's an ally. He is an ally. I've heard him say on more than one occasion, and I went to a signing specifically because I wanted to meet him one time. You know, he wants to put more diversity in his stories. Should we be surprised he's David Bowie's son? And we have that clip going viral every other week on Twitter, where David Bowie is calling out MTV for being racist in like 1980 whatever year. I don't know when that clip was from, but you know, Duncan is one of those people that like, he kind of like Eric, I guess, where, yeah, I mean, you, I guess, embody privilege in a lot of ways, but you like realize the importance of empowering more diverse groups of people, and not just including them for the sake of good PR, but like for meaningful, you know, storytelling, and all that matters. And so, yeah, I think Duncan is underrated, but whatever. Hollywood did it. So
I love him. Yeah, I've like never worked with him, but like what I know of Duncan is very lovely. He is a very nice human being, and I have nothing but good experiences with him and good things to say about him. So
would he direct an episode of Shadow and Bone?
I don't know. Dude, I mean,
ask him. Oh my God, I'm manifesting this. Warcraft was so good, and people didn't get it because he was talking about fear of the other and racism. That's what killed me, is that like what I heard was that a lot of people who were familiar with the source material, they liked it and they felt like it was a good adaptation of the source material. I don't know anything about WoW. I have no idea what that is. I've never played a video game in my entire life. I got it because it was about fear of the other. Paula Patton's character is mixed. So I like immediately got it. And you know what? People slept on it. Where is my Warcraft sequel? Like, I mean, it wouldn't have been as exciting because Toby Kebbell's character died, and I really like Toby Kebbell. But you know what? He's busy anyway. He wouldn't have time. But just, it was a really good movie, and it should be a cult classic. And people should like make a sequel, like put it on a streaming platform or something, like extend it or whatever. I'm so annoyed.
I could be completely wrong. I think one of the problems with the movie has more to do with budget. Like, it's not a cheap movie. That was a super expensive. Yeah.
I mean, but all big blockbusters, especially from pre-existing IPs that are really established, like a video game or like a comic or whatever, they always have big budgets. But it's just, we're world of the streaming really platforms. It's brand new. What is it? Brave New World. Blah blah blah. Like whatever. Duncan Jones is underrated. Stop sleeping on him. Internet, consumers, whatever. Industry. Stop it.
I love Duncan.
Yeah, we're just giving everyone the shout out. Archie's baby. Duncan Jones, Eric. We shout him out in every interview.
Eric.
Yeah, everyone. Like, you get a shout out. You get a shout out. Everyone here gets a shout out. Venom gets a shout out. I'm wearing a Venom shirt. Like,
aww. I love it.
It's like the one Marvel movie that I liked the first one. It was just chaotic as hell, and also Tom Hardy is a genius. So, yeah, and the fact that Andy Serkis is direct, like. I'm excited, but yeah, anyway, that's a whole other conversation for another day. Thank you, Christina, for coming on. Sorry that I ate up so much of your day, as if you don't have other stuff to do, but there's a lot to talk about. I'm impressed that I actually got through basically everything that I had written down. I just assumed we would run out of time, but I was like, I'll over prepare. It's fine. And
it's so funny because I was like, I need to like get to work, and then we just we're talking, and I was just like, I just miss hanging out with you. Let's just keep going. I need to F it, man.
I love that.
But okay, it's such a chaotic discussion too between Vincenzo and Jennifer. I actually still think we should cut some of the Vincenzo stuff, and we should do an actual video dedicated to Vincenzo. And then
we have to set it up, so it's a segue. So like, stay tuned for the next episode with Christina, where we will talk about Vincenzo. And in more explicitly, because there was a lot of stuff that we were kind of saying spoilers, but we were kind of also not being as specific as we could have been if we were doing a full-on spoiler discussion. So this is a very like overly extended preview of what's to come. Now that you've said that you've agreed to it, that also puts pressure off of me, so I don't have to script.
That's why I'm saying cut a huge chunk, because we talked about Vincenzo for at least 45 minutes. Cut it and just put a little card that says, we're actually going to do a Vincenzo episode. Come back for it. And then we can tell people that they need to watch Vincenzo, so that when we talk about it, they are fully primed and ready to view. Because the way we talked about it was so very if you're in the know, you'll understand the function of this scene. But if you're not in the know, you're not going to understand the function.
But we're converting people to watch it by showing how excited we are about it. Because let me tell you, there are so many things that I've started watching just because I'm going, I don't know what that is, but this person is so excited about it that I'm going, all right, what is this thing?
So edit out some of the stuff we said, do the blur or whatever, so that we don't say too much. Get people excited about it, and then we will do the video. And then I'm going to make you watch Uncanny Counter, and then we'll do a video on Uncanny Counter. And
I should still use, I'll still post the Vincenzo stuff, but I can make it its own video for the people that actually have watched Vincenzo, and they're like, oh, they already said stuff about it.
No, we got to do this again. If we're going to do it again, keep it fresh. I'm telling you, we will do one. You'll have your images prepped, and we will get real into it. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I love that show.
Okay, Vincenzo episode coming soon.